Hi, this is Deena Thomson, author of Poppies, and this is Chapter 37.
Chapter 37. Pauline and Alan stood outside their house, illuminated by the only streetlight in the quiet neighborhood. Nervously, she shifted as she eyed her father. "Are you going to tell Mom about Joanna?" He was silent, and she felt a flutter of fear as she realized what that meant. Alan rubbed his stubbly chin, contemplating his next move. "It's not going to be easy," he replied honestly. "No, I'm glad it's you and not me," she smiled weakly, leaning over and kissing his tired face. He grinned sheepishly and rubbed Pauline's lean back. "You go on to bed. I'll deal with your mother." Pauline obeyed, trudging up the stairs, fearful of what might happen when she shut her bedroom door. Slowly turning the knob, she walked inside and closed it until it was slightly ajar. Folding herself into the sitting position beside it, she pressed her ear against the cold wood. Her heart raced as she waited for signs of what would unfold next. Alan placed his hat on the rack and walked into the living room, where Jobeth sat quietly listening to the radio and reading a book. "Hello, darling," she said as he walked into the room. She placed her book aside as Alan leaned down to kiss her. "Jobeth," he said seriously. "What is it? You look odd," she said, starting to stand. Alan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Is it one of the children? Are they all right?" "Joanna is back," he blurted out, finding no other way to say it. He watched her face for any sign of emotion. At first, her face softened, the faint creases in her forehead relaxing. But just as quickly, that familiar glimmer faded, her cheeks reddening in anger and her lips pursing. "I don't want that name mentioned in my house," Jobeth hissed, her fists clenched at her sides as she looked anxiously around the room to see if Alan Michael was nearby. She could not bear the thought of her son overhearing the name of Joanna and the hateful slew of vile words spewing from his mouth that would follow. "Jobeth," Alan beseeched, confronting her, although he expected her reaction to be mixed with some confused emotions. Alan thought that deep in Jobeth's heart, she'd be glad to hear Joanna was back. "Alan," Jobeth glared menacingly, "I mean it." "She has 2 children, our grandchildren." Her face softened, but then chilled for a brief moment, causing the soft crow's feet in the corners of her eyes to look harsh. The torment behind her hazel eyes was evident. She wanted to be happy, but the hurt and anger were still too strong to let go of. Jobeth thought of Mara Joy and the child she should have had with Chad, the child that had cost her the ability to ever have children of her own. She thought how Mara Joy desperately longed for a child of her own, and having to settle for raising other women's children, like the 2 stepdaughters she had with her new husband. Those children were supposed to be Mara Joy's children, not Joanna's. She spat, unwilling to look at him, the injustice evident in her voice. "Think about what you're saying," Alan remarked, shaking his head in disbelief. "As hard as it was for her, Mara Joy has come through all this. She is happily married again and has a life of her own. We have to stop all this nonsense, Jobeth. Our family needs to be reunited once again. We have other children besides Mara Joy and Alan Michael. I think it's time we put the past behind us and move forward as a family." She stood, open-mouthed, unable to avoid staring at him. In nearly 26 years of marriage, they rarely fought. She had never seen Alan look so disappointed in her. "I know I have other children. I have always been quite aware of them," she said, rather nastily. She regretted her tone of voice the moment she heard the words fly out of her mouth. It sounded cold and cruel. She pulled back, the front of her hand covering her mouth, as though trying to stop any nastier words from coming out. Really? Alan exploded. All his resentment toward how Jobeth treated the other girls seemed to be frothing to the surface. Unable to stop the volcano inside of him, he erupted. I'm ashamed to admit that I have sat back and watched you play favorites with our children. I didn't want to believe that the woman I loved could love her children so unequally. You have always preferred Marjoy and Alan Michael to the others. And Joanna, he said as he ran his fingers roughly through his still full hair, my God, you've been the roughest on her. You never let up on how she wasn't like Mara Joy. You put the rivalry between them, Jobeth, and I helped by sitting back and allowing you to do it. If I had been a better father, I would have put a stop to you and the way you were with those children. I have always loved my children, Jobeth countered, unable to believe her ears. She clenched her fists tightly to her sides, ready for battle. How dare you say I love them differently? My love for Mara Joy is the reason you and I are together. She united us. She did, Alan. She needed parents, and we stepped into those shoes. You and I, together. If that child hadn't needed us, who knows where we would be and how our lives would have turned out. We loved each other before there ever was a Mara Joy. We would have ended up together eventually. It was meant to be. His voice softened. He couldn't stand the anguish in her voice. You don't know that. You don't know that for sure. Tears sprang to her eyes. Don't you remember those times when everything seemed to be taken from me, from us, my baby boy, Jonah? Jobeth hadn't spoken of either in years. Saying their names brought their faces fresh to her mind. She rubbed her nose with the back of her hand, trying to erase the memories of those long dead. Did you forget them, Alan? Because I didn't. Her eyes were red-rimmed and full of misery. When I look at our son, I see the baby boy I lost. I see his tiny body gasping in vain for air as he slowly dies in my arms. When Alan Michael was born, it was like I had him back again, but alive and healthy. And then I see the man who helped me deliver him, and I remember how that man, Jonah, helped me to love again. And Mara Joy, oh, Mara Joy. Every time I look at her, I see the child who set me free to love you. I didn't feel I deserved to love, but Mara Joy's presence in our lives forced me to make choices I was too afraid to make. Can't you see? She implored, begging Alan to see her side. Can't you see our children have brought me to where I am? I'm sorry all this pain still haunts you, but that is still no excuse. Joanna is your child as well, and she needs you too. Think about making up with your daughter, Jobeth, he said rather coldly, before it is too late, and you wish you had. He turned and stomped out of the room. Jobeth fell back onto the couch like she'd been socked in the stomach. She closed her eyes, listening to Alan's progress up the stairs to their bedroom. Her throat tightened, and her eyes began to water. Joanna, she whispered. Joanna. I can't believe the nerve! Mara Joy stormed around the kitchen in her parents' house. She was livid. Jobeth and Alan Michael sat at the kitchen table, caught in the cyclone of Mara Joy's wrath. Her hair swung freely in tight curls down her back. Jobeth thought of how much Mara Joy resembled Tamara when she was angry. She had the same feisty spirit, ready to explode at any moment. Settle down, Mara Joy, Jobeth said, feeling slightly annoyed. She glanced at Alan Michael out of the corner of her eye. He was completely frightened by Mara Joy's outburst. They had become quite frequent since Joanna and Chad's return. You are frightening your brother. Alan Michael straightened in his chair. No, she's not, he stuttered, his lips flapping pathetically. Alan Michael, now 17, was a handsome boy with light brown hair and hazel eyes like his mother. In fact, out of all of Alan and Jobeth's birth children, their son was the one who looked slightly different from the rest. He didn't have his father's distinct eyes or his mother's long oval face that his other siblings inherited. He had his father's broad face and his mother's eyes. But this didn't make him less attractive than the others, just different. "But, Mama!" Mara Joy hollered, throwing her hands up into the air. "She stole the only man I truly loved away from me. I hate her! I hate her! I hate her! Don't you hate her?" Mara Joy slammed her fist down on the table, making both Jobeth and Alan Michael jump. These outbursts were becoming more and more violent each time. "That is enough!" Jobeth stood up, shaking. Alan Michael slunk back in his chair, paralyzed. He'd never heard his mother raise her voice to his oldest sister. Stunned, Mara Joy stepped back, speechless. She was just as shocked by her mother's outcry. "Of course I don't hate my own child. I have never hated Joanna. She is my daughter, just like you are, and I could hate her no more than I could hate you." Jobeth's chest rose up and down in anger. Something was breaking inside her, letting go like a dam finally released. "And the man you love should be the husband you are married to now, not the one you married so many years ago when you were still a child." "But, Mama," Mara Joy sobbed in a quiet voice, "she hurt us all so badly." She plunked down dejectedly in the nearest kitchen chair. "What Joanna did was wrong, very wrong, but that was so long ago. You two are sisters. It is time the two of you made up. This family has been torn apart long enough," Jobeth said with resignation, resting her forehead in the palm of her hand. In the weeks since Joanna returned, her thoughts had been occupied with what Alan had said. His words were ringing true. Maybe she had favored these two children more. In fact, if she was really honest with herself, she knew she had. For whatever reason, she had done it. She now needed to fix the mistakes of the past before it was too late. "Enough is enough, Mara Joy." Jobeth's eyes shot to her son, who sat totally mesmerized by what was going on. "Look how you've turned your own brother against his sister. He barely even remembers her and has a horrible hatred for her." "It isn't Mara Joy who makes me hate her, Ma," Alan Michael said calmly. "I dislike her for my own reasons. I don't take kindly to tramps stealing respectful women's husbands away, especially when that respectful woman is my sister. Besides, Ma, have you forgotten how she flung Mara Joy's adoption into her face? That was just cruel. You know she seduces Mara Joy's husband, gets pregnant with his bastard brat, and then screams filth at her, and we are supposed to forgive and forget?" He stood up and put his arms protectively around her quivering shoulders. He was already taller than her, and she seemed small and defenseless in his arms. "It seems Alan Michael and I are the only ones who are not blind to Joanna's schemes." Mara Joy crossed her arms defiantly. Jobeth stood rooted to the spot, her heart pounding as she met their icy stares, feeling the hate steaming from them like a thick fog of menacing fury. "I realize your sister has made a lot of mistakes in her life, but that doesn't change the fact that she is still your sister. Whether you like it or not, that isn't going to change." She turned and left the room, unable to face their anger anymore. "You are blind, Mother, blind, and I can't believe you're turning against me." Mara Joy followed Jobeth. Alan Michael grabbed her arm, holding her firmly back. "I just want my family to be whole again," Jobeth said tiredly, not bothering to turn to the steely eyes that accused her. "And like it or not, that includes Joanna." Jobeth opened the front door, leaving the house and her 2 flabbergasted children behind. The fresh air hit her like a liberating breeze. "Did you see that?" Mara Joy swung around to face Alan Michael. "I saw it, but I don't believe it," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Bitch, bitch, bitch! She has even turned our mother against us. Our mother!" She curved away from Alan Michael's stocky 17-year-old body. "What do you say to that, little brother? Isn't that a fine how-do-you-do?" "She really is an evil little devil." Alan Michael placed a sheltering arm back around his sister. She snuggled into his thick chest, letting the weight of his body protect her. "It's so true, Mikey, so very true. You are the only one who understands the pain and agony Joanna has caused me. The rest have just forgotten." She wrapped her arms around his waist. Alan Michael felt himself become stronger under Mara Joy's grasp. "I would love to see Joanna's brains in a puddle on the floor. I would love to see her squirm in pain as I watch her die." He sneered with passion. Mara Joy looked up and smiled into Alan Michael's darkened face. He had always had a broody side, but the older he got, the more it had grown, twisting and developing into something possibly unnatural. She noticed it when he was small, first his cruelty to animals, and then to other children. She had pushed it aside, choosing to ignore it. He was hers, her Mikey, always there to defend her at any cost. So what if sometimes he was a little too weird? "Oh, Mikey, you do love me, don't you?" she asked sweetly, her head pressed firmly to his heaving chest. "You know I love you more than anyone." He choked, full of emotion, hugging her tighter. "Wouldn't it be great if Joanna were dead? Wouldn't it be great if something happened to her, an accident or something?" Mara Joy sniffed, closing her eyes and feeling safe in Alan Michael's love. Alan Michael became confused. Was Mara Joy serious? It was so hard to know when she was joking. "Then Ma and Pa would be ours again, and I would have Chad back with me where he belongs." "What are you saying?" he asked, looking at his sister with total confusion. "You aren't saying we should have killed her, are you?" "Oh, I don't know," Mara Joy sobbed meekly, shoving her head under Alan Michael's chin. "I just know her children should be mine with Chad, not hers." She sighed and pulled away from his warm embrace. She flopped down on the nearest kitchen chair. "She ruined me, Mikey, having an affair with my husband and running off with him, carrying his illegitimate children." She placed her head down on the table, letting the cool surface calm her skin. "They left me alone and abandoned. The humiliation I suffered by my own sister's hand." She raised her head to Alan Michael's frustrated face. A red, angry mark had developed on her forehead. Alan Michael was listening intently to every word, and she smiled wickedly to herself. "You know, Mikey, she never did pay any attention to you." His brows furrowed together, trying to remember his childhood with Joanna. "She hates you just as much as she hates me. Why, I bet she is cooking up some way to hurt you next." Mara Joy jumped up dramatically and grabbed Alan Michael by the shoulders. "We have to stop her before she gets me, before she gets us." "I won't let her hurt you again," Alan Michael sobbed. Mara Joy took his large head and cradled it to her chest. Her perfumed body made his nose tingle, and he felt himself harden when Mara Joy rubbed her thigh against him. He hugged his sister tighter, burying his face deeper into her fragrant breast. "There, there," she cooed, rubbing the boy's back. She was beaming sinfully, quite amused at how anger aroused her brother. She rubbed her thigh harder on Alan Michael's erection. He groaned, embarrassed between his sobbing. "She better not try and hurt me, right, Mikey?" she muttered louder as he held Mara Joy tighter to him. He was entranced by her, obsessed with her. He always needed more of Mara Joy. Always. She pulled away from the confused, aroused boy. He stood drunkenly before her, hands reaching out in vain. She placed a silky hand on his trembling shoulder. "You have to stop her, Mikey, before she hurts me more." He stood, mouth open, yearning to be in Mara Joy's arms again. "You love me, Mikey? You do?" She pouted. He nodded eagerly like a trained dog. "I've always loved you the most in this world, Mikey. The most. Please stop her." Mara Joy fell to the ground and clutched Alan Michael around the waist, panting heavily on his erect member that lay squashed and ready to pounce out of its tight confinement. "I will," Alan Michael said venomously while clutching Mara Joy's head tight to him. "I will." Mara Joy looked up at her brother. His eyes were screwed shut with intoxication. She grinned to herself and gave him one more hug around his waist, pressing her lips close to his bulging appendage before standing up. She straightened her dress and looked at the helpless blob of a boy in front of her. "Thank you, Mikey." She breathed into his ear, her hand firmly pressed against his chest, where it lingered for a moment. She then wheeled and left hastily, aware of what she had done to her own brother. As soon as the door shut behind Mara Joy, Alan Michael shamefully ran upstairs to his room and stripped his soiled underpants off. As he stood in the bathroom scrubbing his tainted underwear, he bellowed with torment, disgust, and shame. "She is my sister! She is my sister!"